What's up, Oasis? Hey, man, I am glad that you guys are here. Okay, I have a story for you. So if you're anything like me and you ever pick up a nonfiction book, you just want to know what to do. And a couple months ago, I picked up this book on leadership. And I was like, I'm gonna be the best leader that has ever walked this planet because this guy is gonna tell me every single thing I should do. And I pick up this book and I get 50 pages into a book that is 200 pages long, and all this guy has talked about is the Renaissance. And I am frustrated because I don't need to know anything about the Ninja Turtles. All right, I already learned that in middle school. All right, Raphael, Donatello, Michelangelo. There's one I always forget. Maybe I should have learned that. Should have read more closely. But it's like, dude, I don't need to know anything about the Renaissance. I just want to be a really, really great leader. And I got really frustrated because he wasn't giving me information. And then a couple weeks ago, I started remembering what this guy was saying, and I started seeing it play out, and I started seeing how it was so powerful. Because I'm going to give you a short history lesson here. In the year 1400, the Renaissance started. But in the years leading up to that, the world had just been living in darkness. Nobody had actually learned or discovered anything. The bubonic plague had actually killed a third of the world's population, and people are just living without wonder. It's called the Dark Ages, not because it was sad and depressing, but honestly, there was no color. Like, there was no discovery. And so this family moves to a town in Italy, and they are really wealthy, and they start hiring a bunch of artists and scientists to go do a bunch of things. And so suddenly, people are getting paid to do their favorite hobbies, and the world starts to notice. They start to notice that people are actually really good at painting, and you can get paid for it. And soon, the Renaissance is booming. You have scientists, you have artists, you have people discovering like the printing press, like how to get books out to people. People are learning how to read, they're learning how to paint, they're learning how to use a telescope to look up into the sky. They finally made glasses so that people could see clearly. Everything was just booming and expanding, and the world was full of color. But there's this part that gets me, because what happened in 1492? Columbus sailed the ocean blue, right? Columbus in 1492 started this voyage, and he's known as one of the first navigators to sail west. But up until this point, the world has believed that the only land that exists is Europe, the top half of Africa, and Asia. The world is convinced that there is no more land. It's all a dream. You can look at a map, and it might show you land out west, but there's no scientific data to prove it. And so Columbus goes to the king and queen of France 4 different times to say, hey, look, I got no job. I have no savings. I have no ship. I have no crew. I have no money. But will you pay for me to travel west? And 4 different times, the king and queen of France are like, no. Like, why would we ever invest our money in something that we don't even know is gonna turn out? Like, I imagine it like Shark Tank, like you pull up with your nice business proposal and Mark Cuban's sitting right in front of you, and you're like, all right, dude, look at what I got nothing, but will you invest? But finally, Columbus goes to the king and queen of Spain, and something about this changes. And I think it's because Columbus actually invites people into vision and imagination rather than facts and data. Because if we're honest, he had no facts. He had no data. He had nothing going for him. But he's standing there and he's saying, what if? Odds are I'm probably wrong, but what if I'm right? What if I actually find land? What if I find that trade route we've been looking for? And what if it's not you that invested, but someone else? What could you be missing if I find gold? What if? And it's this power of imagination and vision, and so Columbus will sail. And soon other navigators are gonna follow in his footsteps. And if we know anything about these navigators, they're not great because their imagination and their vision was rooted in their own gain. The navigators were actually the reason why the transatlantic slave trade started. That's not great. Their imagination and their vision was rooted in what they could gain for themselves. But tonight we're talking about vision. We're talking about how it gets people on board. It's not knowledge, it's not information that gives us transformation, it's vision. It's when we provide an image of what reality is and what it could be, but our vision has to be rooted in truth. And our king for tonight, I believe, is gifted with vision. Our king for tonight, his name is Hezekiah. And 2 weeks ago when we met, we were looking at how the nation of Israel actually split in two. So you had the northern nation of Israel, and then below it was the nation of Judah. And we looked at how for the rest of the book of Kings, they are going to be separated like this. And Judah is the place where God's promise for David remains, that David will have a king who reigns on the throne forever. This is Judah. This is where Hezekiah will reign. And Israel is a nation that for 200 years, they continually just get worse and worse and worse. Their kings are awful and they are evil. And by the time you reach Hezekiah, the evil and the detestable practices that Israel has continually done will result in their downfall. The nation of Assyria has come and has overtaken Israel, so now the only place that remains is Judah. And this is where Hezekiah gets to reign. And I'm going to spoil the story for you today. Hezekiah is a good king. He's going to have a moment where he's not great, but he's a good king. But if you've ever studied family systems theory, like if you've ever studied psychology, he honestly shouldn't be. He shouldn't be a good king, because every person in his family, his dad that has gone before him, was a pretty terrible king. Every example of a king he could have in Israel was also a terrible king. The only way he knows how to lead is by being a terrible king, yet something's different about him. And over the past couple of weeks, I've been asking this question: how did Hezekiah become a good king? And I think part of it might have been knowledge, but honestly, I think most of it was vision. Most of it was the way that his vision, what he saw currently and what he dreamed God could do, was rooted in God's character and rooted in his truth. Hezekiah is a good king because his vision is rooted in truth. It's rooted in who God is. It's rooted in what is good, pleasing, pure, honorable, and lovely. And tonight, I invite you to turn to the book of 2 Chronicles, if you have your Bible. 2 Chronicles parallels the story of the kings, but it gives us an inside look into the worship of the kings. And in 2 Chronicles chapter 28, we're actually seeing that the author is setting up this moment where Hezekiah is about to take the throne. And he's explaining to us the spiritual state that Judah is in. And so starting in 28, we're going to hear about Hezekiah's dad. We hear that Ahaz was 20 years old when he became king, and he reigned in Jerusalem 16 years. Unlike David, his father, he did not do what was right in the eyes of the Lord. He followed the ways of the kings of Israel and also made idols for worshiping the Baals. He burned sacrifices in the valley of Ben-Hinnom and sacrificed his children in the fire, engaging in the detestable practices of the nations the Lord had driven out before the Israelites. He offered sacrifices and burned incense at the high places, on the hilltops, and under every spreading tree. Within just 4 verses, this isn't even the whole story of Ahaz and what he's done. Within 4 verses, we find out that Hezekiah's dad is not just a bad king, but he's actually evil. He's adopting these evil and harmful practices and implementing them in the nation of Judah, like practices such as child sacrifice and calling it worship. But if we keep reading, we also hear what Ahaz does to the holy place of God's living temple. We read that Ahaz gathered together the furnishings from the temple of God and cut them in pieces. He shut the doors of the Lord's temple and set up altars at every street corner in Jerusalem. In every town in Judah, he built high places to burn sacrifices to other gods and aroused the anger of the Lord, the God of his ancestors. Ahaz not only implements evil, but he closes the doors and prevents people from coming into the presence of God. He prevents the people of Judah from being able to worship, and he will add idols on every street corner and under every single tree. This is what Hezekiah is inheriting. Think about it. Everything he's seen, like for 16 years, the years that his father has reigned, the people of Judah are going to grow desensitized to the vile images of what Ahaz has implemented. They're going to grow desensitized to child sacrifice. They're going to see these idols and these altars, and they're going to think that it's going to be okay, because for 16 years they've seen these images over and over and over again. And now when Hezekiah is about to take the throne, he has to invite people to something different. And knowledge isn't going to do it. Knowledge is not going to cut it. Knowledge is not enough for us to change our way. We need vision. We need an image. We need a picture of what our reality is and what it could be. And in chapter 29, the story becomes so beautiful. We read that in Hezekiah, in the first month of the first year of his reign, he opened the doors of the temple of the Lord and repaired them. Hear that. In the first month of the first year, within the first 30 days that he becomes king, he opens the doors of the temple and he repairs them. Isn't that beautiful? What Ahaz tried to keep away, Hezekiah is going to open. And it's just this image of the presence of God just being flooded into the nation of Judah. It's this image that Ahaz has led his kingdom in darkness, but Hezekiah is going to bring life and color. Isn't that beautiful? And if we keep reading, we see that Hezekiah not only opens the doors, but he will call back the priests, like the pastors who worked at the temple and did all of the sacrifices and led the people in worship. He's going to call them back and he's going to say, hey, like, I need you. I got a job for you. He calls them to purify themselves first. So before they will ever even preach or sing or offer a sacrifice, the priests are called to fix themselves first. They're called to get right with God first. They're called to repent. They're called to be cleansed because they have a responsibility. They have the responsibility of leading God's people in worship, and they are called to be holy and cleansed before that. Isn't this beautiful? And we read that the priests, they began the consecration on the first day of the first month, and by the 8th day of the month, they reached the portico of the Lord. The priests, they did not wait until their calendar freed up. They didn't say, oh man, I have a family vacation this week, I can't make it. Let me see if someone can cover my shift at work. Actually, this weekend doesn't work good for me, but maybe like 3 months from now, I might have time. No, the priests, it was the first thing they did on the first day of the first week. They make themselves right with God. And then they make a space where others can be made right with God. Hezekiah is starting his reign by purifying what Ahaz broke, by inviting God and opening the doors to God's presence for the people of Judah to wonder what God can do. This is the power of vision and imagination, because knowledge doesn't do this. Formulas can't accomplish this. Hezekiah is opening doors to invite others to see what he sees, and Hezekiah sees God's heart. He sees like what would happen if we received his forgiveness. What would happen if we were a community that showed his love and his mercy, his justice? What would happen if we were a community that lived in his grace and gave grace to other people? His imagination, by opening these doors, is inviting people to see who God is. And when the temple is finally restored, the kingdom of Judah will worship. They rejoice, they sing, and they praise God. But Hezekiah doesn't stop here. He keeps imagining and he keeps wondering what God could be up to. But he does this by remembering the truth of God's character. And if you don't know God, or if you feel far away from him, let me remind you tonight that our God is love. That is who he is. God is love, and his heart is for the world to know him. His heart is for the world to know that he created them out of love. His heart is for them to know that he offers a way of life, a way that leads us away from destruction, but in a way of communion and relationship, of healing and wholeness with him. This is God's heart. His heart is for his goodness to be on display, his glory to be on display through his people. His kingdom is not exclusive, but he invites every single person to the table. No matter who you are, no matter where you've been, you are invited to the table, and you are invited to experience, to hear, to see God's love for you. And in the Old Testament, one of the most amazing and incredible ways God's people are invited to do this is with the festival of Passover. Passover was a festival that was created in order to remember what God did, the greatest saving work he led his people through in the Old Testament. God's people were enslaved by Egypt for hundreds of years, and God raised up a leader named Moses, and Moses led them out of Egypt. He led them into freedom. He led them into their salvation, and Passover is a way that the people of God get to remember this. And Hezekiah, in the back of his mind, he's like, man, God's character is for people to know him. And so Hezekiah reinstitutes this practice of Passover that was lost during the reign of his father Ahaz. But he doesn't stop there. He actually invites people to the party. And I gotta show you this map because the nation of Assyria, okay, hang with me for a second. The nation of Assyria is this orange thing, all right? And they captured Israel. So Judah's here down at the bottom in the green. But when Assyria captured the northern nation of Israel, all the people followed that red arrow up to those regions and up to those cities. So the people of God who lived in the northern nation of Israel are not in where Israel used to be. Because as I travel north, the people that are from Assyria and living north, they actually come down south and start taking over the places where Israel used to be. So Hezekiah is sending invitations to what used to be the northern nation of Israel, but the people of God do not live there anymore. Assyrians live there. People who don't know God. People who worship false idols. People who worship fake gods. Hezekiah is sending invitations for people to come and to feast and to remember God's salvation. Hear this, because in the Old Testament, this is such a beautiful image of evangelism. Evangelism is not something that happened once Jesus died and rose and rescued us from our sins. It's been the plan of God. It has been plan A since the beginning. And Hezekiah is our participating in the vision of God because he is rooted in God's character and he is rooted in God's truth. God created us because he loves us. And he put his image in us, so that we could show his glory and his goodness and make himself known to the nations. And Hezekiah is doing this by inviting Assyrians to worship. Hezekiah is inviting people who don't know God to the feast that proclaims God's salvation. Man, there's so much beauty. Hezekiah can do this because he has allowed his imagination to be shaped by the truth of who God is. His dreams and his desires, his longings have been shaped by God's character. He longs for what God longs for, and because of that, he gets to extend God's grace and God's mercy to the entire world. Hezekiah's vision is aligned with God's vision for the entire world. And imagine if you were living in Judah at this time. Imagine if you got to witness it, like if you got to see a community that was actually living into what God had for them. Think about people extending love in a world that is full of hate. People extending justice in a world that is full of brokenness and hurt. People extending mercy in a world that is full of need. Hezekiah is doing his best to invite people into this image. He's doing his best to proclaim the character of God by allowing people to be the hands and feet of God in motion. This is beauty. And in Chronicles, we spent our time in here tonight because there are 4 chapters devoted to Hezekiah and his life. And 3 of them just talk about his worship. 75% of his life in Chronicles is about the way he worshiped God. And the last chapter of his life is how he kept dreaming and longing and asking God to shape his vision even when it was hard. And so Assyria, they conquered and captured the northern nation of Israel. But near the end of Hezekiah's reign, Assyria tries to attack Judah. And they're actually somewhat successful in this. Assyria makes it all the way to Jerusalem. Jerusalem is the city where Hezekiah, where his palace is, where the temple is. And Jerusalem has a really nice, fortified wall that surrounds it. And so the Assyrians can't get in, but they have surrounded the city. And so if you're in Judah, you can't get out. If you're not in Judah, you can't get into Jerusalem. You're just a sitting duck waiting inside the walls of Jerusalem, honestly wondering when the Assyrians are going to attack. How would you feel? Feel pretty great, Feel pretty at peace? Yeah, I would not. I would be anxious. I would be buying toilet paper and stocking up on it. I'd be building my own bunker. I'd be buying as many cans of beans as I could in case I needed to hide out for a while. I would be stressed. I would be anxious. But do you know what Hezekiah does? He remembers God's character. And in chapter 32, he encourages the people of Judah to do the same. He tells them, he says, be strong and courageous. Do not be afraid or discouraged, because the king of Assyria and the vast army with him, for there is a greater power with us than with him. With him is only the arm of flesh, but with us is the Lord our God to help us and to fight our battles. And the people gained confidence from what Hezekiah, the king of Judah, said. And I think these words are profound. Hezekiah is proclaiming that the nation of Assyria, whoever leads him, that king over them, he has an arm of flesh. And our living God does not. Our living God has an arm of power and a God of might. And Hezekiah can see this and Hezekiah can proclaim this because Hezekiah knows who God is. Hezekiah has spent time with God. He has spent time worshiping with him, praying, communicating, talking. He has spent time learning God's character. And because of that, he can proclaim the truth of who God is. He can encourage Israel. Hezekiah's worship has given him the ability to see what God can do when he's surrounded. So when Assyria has outnumbered him, out-strategized him, and has surrounded him on every single side, Hezekiah can rest in peace and knowing that God's promise is gonna stay true. Hezekiah can rest knowing that Judah will not be overtaken, that God is going to keep his word and going to protect them. And Hezekiah can do this because he is faithful. But the challenge gets harder because the king of Assyria, his name is Sennacherib, he starts trying to do some psychological warfare. All right, so the Assyrians have surrounded Jerusalem and they start trying to taunt and to spread lies to the people who are just sitting ducks. They are the people of Jerusalem, they're sitting in their town and they just hear these verbal assaults of the Assyrians making fun of the true and living God. Because the Assyrians, they have captured every single city, they have captured every single country they have gone to invade. And within each of those nations and those cities, there's been an idol that was worshiped. There's been an idol that was called upon that the people would say, dude, come save us. And they'd call on this fake God, and then the Assyrians would capture them. And the Assyrians have, for every single nation, proven that these gods are fake because they couldn't save their people. And the Assyrians believe in this moment that they're about to overtake Jerusalem because they do not believe that our God is true and living and active. And so they are launching these verbal assaults. They're saying, do not listen to Hezekiah. He is lying to you. He's not telling you the truth. Come on out, we'll protect you because your God can't, but maybe we can. And they keep doing this, and for days, imagine what it would be like to hear this, to have your faith just devalued. It would be hard. And we read, the author of Chronicles tells us that they spoke about the God of Jerusalem as they did about the gods of the other peoples of the world, the work of human hands. They spoke about our God in the same way that they spoke about the gods of every other nation, gods that can't provide, gods that can't save, gods that have no power, gods that are not real. And through this whole entire ordeal, Hezekiah will cling to the truth because he knows who God is. He knows that our God is real. He knows that our God is powerful. He knows that our God is mighty, and he starts inviting the people to prayer. He doesn't build up an army. He doesn't build a bunker. He doesn't try and flee out the back and save his life. He invites the people to pray. He invites the people to come into the presence of God and to stand firm in his promise and to remember his truth. And we read that the Lord sent an angel who annihilated all the fighting men and the commanders and the officers in the camp of the Assyrian king. So Sennacherib withdrew to his own land in disgrace. And when Sennacherib went into the temple of his God, some of his sons, his own flesh and blood, cut him down with the sword. So the Lord saved Hezekiah and the people of Jerusalem from the hand of Sennacherib, king of Assyria, and from the hand of all others. He took care of them on every side. The Lord hears our prayers, and the Lord delivered the people of Judah. And as Sennacherib goes back to Assyria, to the temple of his fake God, he's cut down because his God's not real. His God can't save. And I think for us tonight, it's really easy to hear this story and to say, you know what, if I pray, God will make everything better. And God does hear our prayers, but there's more to it. Because surrender is not something that's passive. Surrender is active participation in the work that God's doing. It's not saying, all right, I'll just pray for a great test score and then not study. It's saying, God, like, I believe that you will renew my mind. I believe you will give me strength. And I believe that you will invite me into the work that I need to do in order to accomplish this. Hezekiah, he steps back in surrender. He believes that God will deliver him, not by human strength, but by divine strength. And Hezekiah steps back to make space for God to move. And this isn't passive. Because imagine the people that are living in Jerusalem. They're probably pretty freaked out. You probably got some people that are trying to figure out if they can form their own militia and overtake the Assyrians. Hezekiah's got to put that down because the Lord's going to deliver them. Hezekiah's got to make decisions to make sure that the people are kept at peace, because this is going to be a moment in which the Lord can take 100% credit for what happens. It will not be because of anyone in Jerusalem, but it will be 100% by the Lord that the people of Judah are saved. And Hezekiah has to make sure that this can happen. So this wasn't passive, this is active participation in what God is doing. And what is God doing in this moment? He's saving his people. Remember, the nation of Assyria has denounced all the idols in the area. They've proven them as fake gods. And so the world is watching in this moment as Jerusalem is about to get overtaken, and no one inside Jerusalem leaves the city. The gates are shut, no one forms an army, but the entire army of the Assyrians fall. They are destroyed. And it's in this moment where the nations are watching as the true and living God, the God of Judah, is saving his people. No other God can do this. No other God has saved their nation from the Assyrians except for the God of Judah. This is a proclamation of the truth and power of God. And Hezekiah is obedient in this moment because he sees this vision. He sees that God is going to make himself known to the nations, that God will invite the nations to worship him, to be in relationship with him. And as Assyria is defeated, the glory of God is put on display for the entire world to witness. And this victory, it will lead to prosperity. Hezekiah will receive honor and fame and wealth for what happens here. He will be blessed with that for his obedience, but it slowly starts to cloud his vision. It slowly starts to put up blind spots, because an act that was done completely by the power of God's hand will give Hezekiah tangible and physical rewards that he can show off to others. And if we turn back real quick in 2 Kings chapter 20, we hear this story of Hezekiah's downfall, and his downfall is because of pride. We read that when Hezekiah received envoys from Babylon and showed them all that was in his storehouses, the silver, the gold, the spices, the fine olive oil, his armory, and everything found among his treasures, there was nothing in his palace or in all his kingdom that Hezekiah did not show them. Then Isaiah the prophet went to King Hezekiah and asked, what did those men say? And where did they come from? From a distant land, Hezekiah replied, they came from Babylon. The prophet asked, what did they see in your palace? They saw everything in my palace, Hezekiah said. There is nothing among my treasures I did not show them. Hezekiah is receiving envoys from Babylon because they want to see all this great power and wealth that Hezekiah has. So he starts showing them everything he owns. To every storeroom, every trophy room, Hezekiah is going to show them everything. And it's an opportunity for Hezekiah to reveal that it's by God's grace he's been given these blessings, but Hezekiah presents them in order to exalt himself. And it's this moment where his pride overtakes him, where his vision is clouded, where he misses an opportunity to proclaim the goodness of God to another nation. It's this moment where he can't see what God has been inviting him into. When I was in high school, I was dared by a group of friends to join the swim team, and I'm not a swimmer. I did like swimming lessons for a couple of years, but that's about it. And so I'm like, yeah, cool, it'll be fine. I don't back down from a challenge. So I show up to swim, and it was one of the hardest things I've ever done in my life. But a fun fact about me, I am afraid of water that I can't see in, so like lakes or pools that have way too much chlorine in them, like, oh my gosh, I do not want to be there. It's awful. And there's something I learned about swimming, because these are a pair of my goggles. Goggles steam up after a while, all right? And so if you're in the middle of a set and you don't get to like wipe the lenses off, you're just like swimming around and you got your goggles on and they're really small and all you can see is this fog, and I would swim and I'd get really nervous and really anxious, and I'd spend all of this energy trying to figure out, when can I be done? When can I be done? I gotta get this off because I can't see. Like, you can get kicked in the face if you swim too close to someone, or a couple of times someone would do like a flip turn and I wouldn't see them and they'd flip like right into me, and it's like, I just need to wipe these off because I can't see. And so I learned a lot that year. I learned that how I adjust my straps, the boundaries I put on them, how I place them on the back of my head will actually prevent some of the steaming up. And I also learned that I have times when I'm swimming where I can stop and to wipe the cleanses clean. Now, this doesn't mean I get to do that in a race. Doesn't mean I get to do that in the middle of my set. But when that set's over, I get to pause. And I get to take them off, wipe them with my fingers real quick, put them back on and keep going. I had to learn that I had to do the work, that I had to show up, that I had to make the space in order to wipe the lenses clean so I could see them. And I think that this is how Hezekiah's downfall begins. Because it's like this one blurry spot shows up. And it's not big. Like, it's there. But you can still see, right? It's not a big problem. But as we keep going, his pride builds, and it kind of gets a bit bigger. But it's fine. You know, you still have the left eye. That's all you really need is one eye. But then it's like, no, it gets really, really big, and then suddenly, like, he legit cannot see. And he starts showing all these people from Babylon, hey, look what I earned for myself. God's grace didn't give me this. His blessing didn't give me this. Look what I earned for myself. And this is what happens when our vision is not in line with God. We miss his opportunities to extend his goodness, his wealth, and his honor and his fame. And I think sometimes in my life, I walk around with goggles and I'm like, you know what? Yeah, I probably did miss my quiet time this morning, but I'll have one tomorrow. Yeah, I missed small group this week, but I can go in a couple of weeks when my schedule clears up. And slowly, the blindness just keeps coming. The spots continue and continue to grow. Instead of running to the Father who can cleanse us from our sight, who can make this clean, Hezekiah chooses to take credit for things himself. How do you respond when your vision is blurry? Do you keep going? Do you ignore the signs? Do you ignore the spots? Or do you stop and worship? Do you have rhythms and routines in your life that keep your vision from fogging over? Or do you wait until you can't see, until you're completely blindsided to start worshiping God and to start having your vision corrected? Here's the thing, we can't afford to have our eyes fog over. We can't afford it. God is at work. He's got something planned for us. He's got something planned for the entire world, and he's been inviting us into it. We can't afford to miss it. We can't afford to let the things in our life create blind spots. We can't afford to let them grow, because when we let them grow, it's going to lead us down a path of destruction, and it's going to lead us down a path of sin. We cannot afford to let our eyes miss what God is doing. We can't afford to let it miss the truth he's proclaiming. We can't afford to miss it. And even if we can't afford it, I don't want to miss it. I don't want to miss what God is doing. I don't want to miss the ways he's moving on campus. I don't want to miss the way he's been moving in your guys' small groups. I don't want to miss that. I want to see that. I want to participate in what God's doing, and I want to do everything I can to meet with him and to get my eyes straightened out, to get them clear, to get them clean. I want to do everything I can to see God at work. And for some of us in the room tonight, like, I say this with all the love in my heart. coming to Oasis on a Sunday night from 8 to 9 p.m. is a really great place to start, but it's not enough. And I am so glad if you've been coming here once a week or throughout the summer, if you've been in a small group, I am so glad that you started. I'm so glad you're on that journey. But it's not enough, because even this past week, there were so many moments where just like within 5 minutes, my lenses were entirely covered and I had to stop and I had to say, God, I need you to renew my sight because I am not seeing truth right now. I cannot afford to go once a week of meeting with God. I need him day by day, hour by hour, moment by moment to restore my vision and to see what he has for us and to see what he is doing. Our world is crazy. Our lives are crazy. And we need God, and he is there to provide for us. And so we're gonna keep worshiping tonight, and I just invite you to keep having a conversation with the Lord right now, because he's faithful in renewing our sight and inviting us. He's faithful in revealing to us the things that cloud us, the things that make us foggy. He's doing something here, and we have the invitation to be a community that together as a body extends his love, his goodness, his justice, and his mercy. Would you guys pray with me?